we're going to go back to the basics here. It's going to feel like, I don't know, something. I was thinking of some music video, but I couldn't get there. I have this table. Notice it's clean. So it's a big thing. Okay. I have this project I've been working on. We'll call it Project What is Going On with Him in His Mind, right? Where I'm doing all this stuff with these molds. And you guys saw a mold that was based on the wheel, and you saw a mold that was based on playing around with plaster, right? But I think, and you've heard a little bit about my philosophy and theories, but there's a very simple principle that I think I'm missing, and it has to do with circles and squares, right? And so I'm spending a little time getting to know them, right? So I'm throwing things on the wheel that are different circles. Some are wider, some are smaller. And then I'm trying to work them out as compositions and make a mold from them, right? This is entirely possible for a project that you could do for Sasha. And so I packed these pieces up and I sent them, and I played with them the other day. This is a circle, right? It came from that. And I just cut it. You can see a 90-degree angle here to here, right? Makes a bridge. And then I made smaller circles. I cut them a little weird, so I don't exactly know what I did with them. Right? And then I cleaned this surface. We'll get back to all of this. And then I just started playing around with these things. I thought, okay, well maybe it could look like this. Well, it can't look like that because the slip will pour out. Right? Maybe it could look like that. I don't know. And I arrived at this composition here, which, judging by my keys, sorry, I've already confused myself in this process. Oh yeah, this was upside down. Here, we'll just put it on. I decided on this composition, which, surprise, surprise, looks a lot like a mandolin. Boom, right, from the profile. So my job, oh, and then I made a top and I made a bottom that keyed them together, right? So my job over the next hour and the next day is to explain to you how this happened, right? It's to kind of work through the process of starting with something on the wheel and then casting it, cutting it apart, reassembling it, and making this mold. Okay? This doesn't look like a mold we've seen before. Again, it looks like a crazy person's mold, but that doesn't mean it's not mold just the same. So we're going to do it. What's up? Well, I could change this mold, right? I could make new components and mess around with it and then cast a different top and bottom, and I would have a different mold, right? It's like building blocks, Legos for kids. You know, we just keep going around. So we start here, once again in our collaboration. Make sure you pour it all the way up. And then it'll, when it stops dripping, then flip it back over so it stands straight. I did a bit of a collaboration here with Jones von Jonstein and our friend Kelly that we know all too well at this point. So they just threw these for me. These are the subjects of our 2-day thing, okay? This is stuff that we call metal flashing. Anybody make roofs? Do roofing? Roofing? No? Okay. I do a lot of home improvement stuff. So I love this stuff. But it also makes a good thing for making molds, right? Took me a long time to get this hint, and I'm going to give it to you. Right now, it's my gift to you. If you keep this thing really wide, it's not flimsy. It's a big part of the thing. Oh, snap, we need some clay.
You need some clay?
Yeah. Boom. Good man.
So it doesn't matter how wide it is, because that's just outside.
Doesn't matter how wide it is?
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, like, it doesn't have to be exactly perfectly fitting to the...
no. I generally am... Thank you. I'm generally looking for about 1.5 inches of plaster surrounding this thing. Now you'll notice with this mold, it got very thin and then it broke in shipping. I don't think it matters all that much to me in my process if it's not 1.5 inches, but it does break easily. Does anyone have any questions at this point?
How many layers of flashing were there free?
I just told her to cut from a 25 foot length, 2 10-foot lengths and 1 5-foot length. For a while I was getting really cheap with it, and I was just trying to cut to the size that I needed. Wasn't good. This is not a step in the process to be cheap, because what I'm going to hopefully not do today is blow out the plaster. And when I do that, I think, why was I being cheap? Because it's a huge mess. And it can be dangerous. I actually do have a good story about that. I have a really good story. See how I'm casting on this countertop material? For a while I cast it on very thick glass, right? And about 6 weeks before my grad show, 6, 7 weeks, somewhere in there, I have this it's a big mold. It's like, big mold. And I'm casting it on the glass. And the glass it was framed out, so it was actually sitting just above, there's a little bit of air below it, right? And I'm casting the plaster, and and it's crazy. It's midnight. It's intense. Feel the drama, right? And what happens, the glass broke. And all of a sudden, I have plaster going everywhere. And I think, wow, I did a bad job. I was being too cheap. So what do? I go to put all the plaster in a bucket. And the plaster turns red. And I had to still fill the mold because I had to get the work done. And I'm, just get it. So I guess there are more dangers than my cat Ken in a pottery studio. Moral to that story.
You're gifted at hurting yourself.
I'm very gifted. When I met them, I had hurt myself over and over again. It's crazy. Okay. We're about to mix some plaster, folks. Before we do, we're just going to hold this down a bit. What?
Fettling knife. Where is that? See it?
The fettling knife? Sash, do you want to get in on this with me? Okay. Ready? I'm measuring the cylinder. It's about 7 3/4 inches. We'll call it 7.5. I'm measuring the outside, and it's about 10 3/4. We'll call it 11. Well, I'm going to show you in 1 second. 8. Okay. Are we ready to do some math? The cylinder here, 8 by 8 by 4.5. It is 8 inches that way, 8 inches that way. I want it 4.5 inches tall, right? So anyone that can do this faster than me? That is 288. Right? We divide that by a very magic number called 80. And we get 3.6. All right? What? We'll get there in just 1 second. 11 by 11 by 4.5, right? Equals 544.5 divided by 80. This is 6.8. What this number right here means is that if I was just to fill this circle with plaster, the outside one, I would need 6.8 quarts of water just to fill it, right? But because I have this cylinder inside, I can take 3.6 quarts away. We are then left with 3.2 quarts of water. This is the important number.
Why 80?
Why 80? I don't know, someone told it to me and it just worked, and I said, there are some things in life you just don't question. I don't actually know. Yeah, somebody.
Can you explain that one more time?
Yes. The equation is, wait.
Cubic inch to quart.
length times width times height divided by 80 equals quarts of water. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, they measured quarts, not ounces.
Yeah. Okay, we need how many quarts of water? Oh. So for a moment, I just have to do a few more calculations. Who asked what? What? Height. Can I get some numbers real quick? 8 and 5. Just stay with me here for a moment, folks, and we'll get it all done. 3.6. So, 3.2 for the big one, 2.2 for the middle one, 1.5 for the little bear. Put them all together. We're essentially 7 quarts of water. That's actually one of these big guys right here. So I will quickly mix some of this. So this is plaster right here. Generally, 9,052 times out of 10, you have to wear respirators. You should always exercise perfect health precautions when you're using this stuff. I happen to not have a respirator, and I'm going to do as good a job as I can not to make that plaster jump right now. Nonetheless, I have to do this. It's a risk I'm willing to take. So be advised, you should always use a respirator when you're doing this. So,
Are you just dumping that in, or how are you?
yeah. I'm trying to break up some of the bumps in here. Plaster is a little bit bumpy.
You don't have a specific amount to put in? Just do it
No,
as possible.
I'm very calculated with the quarts of water, but when it gets to this point, I do it all by eye. And I'm hoping that I'll get everyone around so you can see what it actually looks like when I get closer to that point.
But if they weren't yet.
Okay, now I had said that thing about no touching, real quick. Why did I say that? Not to be mean, but the thing about plaster is, if it sits like this, it can sit for a long time, right? I could call up my friend on the phone and I could say, yo, let's talk. An hour's gone by. And it still will just sit there. But the second I get in there and really shake it up, it's going. It's agitated. The clock has been set. And we have a short period of time before it will be hard, right? So what you did is not, it won't agitate it. When you stick your hand in there and you get to going, it's go time. So,
Can I ask a question?
yes.
How did you know when this, I mean, how much plaster to put in the water? Just until it comes to the surface?
Well, you can see, come here again. Now all the plaster has sunk below the surface of the water, but you can see it, it looks as though there's just a little, there's something down there. It's not just cloudy water. There's actual texture just below the surface, right? That's what the plane is. It's just under there, just a little bit. You see that?
Yeah, the cottage cheese.
Cottage cheesy. Cottage cheese.
Well, it looks like cottage
I like
cheese.
it.
Well,
I'm in.
Do you alter that? Because some projects you want a denser plaster, or some you want it to be a little more porous?
I really don't have very high expectations for the plaster I produce. I don't really bother with that. Sometimes though, if I want it to go fast, really fast, I'll put very hot water in. And that's when I'm usually doing something that requires a lot of faith. You know, like when I have something that's way tall and I haven't really, you know, I put some tape on it and it's just precarious and I want to pour the plaster in, and even if it starts leaking out, it'll harden before it's a big problem. Hot water. But in the case of this, where I don't know if I have the strength to lift that bucket quickly, I will wait, or I'll give it the cold water. This is not a good time for these to be here. I generally prepare this to be kind of like a fallout shelter because I don't know what's going to happen. Anything could happen. Could we wash these and then cap this stuff up? Thank you very much. Okay, I've given this about 3 minutes. The longer you give it to set within reason, the better it will be, is all I can say. You want to give it that time for it to settle, for the particles to be surrounded by water on their own before you plunge. Now I'm going to plunge, right? I'm going to hold my hand like this, and I'm going to stir like this. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to create bubbles. I'm not going to swim in the thing, right? The agitation needs to happen like this, or you will create a ton of air bubbles, right? Now, I say this, but when I'm at home, I use a big drill, and I just go, bubbles come up all over the place. It's crazy. But the speed at which that is turning the thing becomes essential for a different kind of plaster that a different kind of consistency with the plaster for me. So I'm in there. I notice that this plaster isn't necessarily the freshest. It's already settling a bit in strange ways on the bottom. There are chunks in there. So I'm actually trying to, as much as I can, gently break those chunks with my hand. One feels like an actual chunk of something. Right?
She's trying to pour half of it at a time. It was kind of haphazardly done.
Here, I'm gonna slide right next to you.
Totally. Just kind of slapped together. And so she had an assistant helping her mix the clay. Just talk about what you just did. Just kind of
I'm just knocking it on the ground. It's bringing the bubbles up to the surface. And then just kind of push those to the side.
Yeah. So anyway, we want to talk about later.
You talk about it for me. I can't really actually speak right now.
When you pour the plaster, you kind of want to pour it down the side of the mold.
Oops.
Because then what that does is it fills the mold from the bottom up. You don't want to just dump it in there and have it go splashing around. You want to fill it slowly from the bottom up and let it sort of work its way around your piece.
Freshest. I can feel that in the bucket. But so I'm shaking it, using my hips, pretending I'm getting ready for the dance floor, and I'm shaking the thing. The bubbles are coming to the top. I don't know how you guys dance on the West Coast, but in Rochester, just like that. Okay. Yep. I also poured some stuff all over the table. Now, what's that about? I usually don't pour plaster on a table this tall. I also usually don't use a huge bucket like that when I'm pouring. These were two things that I wasn't used to. But luckily, I knew I had more than enough plaster, so I just let it drop there, right? If I was down a little more and I had a huge bucket, I could really get on top of it and see exactly where it was. This is something about setup. It's very important for you to know what you need on the table, right? So right now, the plaster's setting. It needs time. When the plaster's done setting, where's my drawing paper? Yes, please. I don't purport to be an excellent drawer when I need to explain something. When it's done, this will be open and we'll have a donut of plaster, right? So it's my job tomorrow to create crosshairs perfectly in the center of this thing, right? Cut this into pieces, all three of these, and then reassemble them. Play with them, and then make a mold from that, right? Does that make sense? I used a very simple way to explain something complicated. And I can also start to play with geometry. Maybe this one I cut like this and this, like a dart, like you would if you were throwing something on the wheel. And then I find a 90-degree angle there, and then, you know, they'll stick together. But all of these weird things that I'm doing tomorrow, all this complexity will be solved and figured out. Okay, so if you can make it, that would be wonderful. But if not, I hope that this was helpful, and I hope that the basic principle of plaster was helpful. Yes?
How do you make the keys?
How do I make the keys? Yes! We will be doing this tomorrow. I've seen a lot of people use quarters, and they just, but that takes energy, and I want to expend my energy for talking. So I use this. I chuck it in, cut it down, perfect key, right? Looks like a nice big fatty bump, right? So I make the key by, I'll have these chunks, and at the top and the bottom, I'm going to want to key them in. So I'll cut this down, and then I'll use this mold soap, and it will seal this off. I'll cast plaster on top of that, and I'll have a mold. Okay? Any other questions?
How do you do that with, like, when you combine, like in the one that you have keys on? How do you pour that so you can get the keys in the side? If you're pouring it and then cutting it up.
I don't have keys in the sides.
And that one you do. Cut.
Well, this was a different thing. I made this mold a long time ago. It's not even worth explaining. Basically, I had done one.
Yeah,
Okay.
Knowing how you make the keys now, I was confused by that, but it's the
Yeah.
thing, so.
Ignore not what I do, what I say. You know, what I say. Why don't I use keys on them now? Because, first of all, it's a part of the process. I use a key at the bottom to lock the thing together. But this sharp line, for me, is a great source of content. And so what I do when these things are standing next to each other, like if I do that, that changes the thing, right? This changes it dramatically.
You guys see that?
So,
You can offset it a little
right,
bit,
I can
change the form.
I can do this, right? That's a very simple way to explain what I can do with this process. I could do this, I could, and that's a large part of what this mold is, right? It's all just different intervals of different angles, and they're being kind of pushed in different ways. Now, another thing, you notice that I just took this and slid it, and I was able to smooth that edge, right? If I had keys all over the side of this thing, then it would go ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. So on these, it's very difficult to move quickly, right? So it's just born out of process again.
What do you use to cut the plaster?
What do I use to what?
Cut the plaster.
Cut the plaster. At home, I have a big bandsaw in my basement. It's the one expensive purchase I made. It goes like this. I cut things up real fast. Here, we're roughing it. It's pumpkin time. And I don't know, I haven't done this in quite some time, but I presume I still have it. So hopefully tomorrow we'll be able to cut into some plaster with these. All right? Any other questions?
What consistency is the plaster when you cut it?
When I cut it, it's hard, but it's still wet. Yep.
So how long would it normally take that to sit?
This will have to sit for another 20 minutes until what they call, I don't know the technical term, but it's a heating cycle
Right.
that matures the plaster. So yeah, about 30 minutes total time, give or take. Now when I'm doing something where I'm actually casting keys like this, I'm much more respectful of it heating up and cooling down. I need it to go through that cycle to really be hard. If not, I crack the key off and I've lost my mojo. But here it's not a big deal.
The dryness of the clay is just leather hard. Is that the optimal?
These,
Yeah.
it could be anything. I learned the coolest thing right before I came here. It was early in the morning and I was casting a big bottle, right? And with the bottles, when I'm casting from the top, I put something like this on top of it so that I can cast the plaster down the side of it. It's sitting on the wheel and it's spinning, right? And then, so it's leveling itself out on the wheel and it's doing the whole thing, right? And these bottles had really small necks. So I went, oh, I don't know what to do. And it was a really wet pot. Two things that were kind of a problem. So I took a piece of clay and rolled it up and just shoved it in there, right? And then I poured the plaster and I realized that I had an unbelievable amount of weight of plaster sitting on a very wet pot. And I went, Dios mío, it's like, whoa. And I went upstairs and I said, Lori, I don't know what's going on. And she said, please, go let me sleep. I was like, no, but I think everything's gonna crash. And then nothing happened. And I went, what's up with that, right? And then I pulled the little cap off, and what had happened was it had created a seal, created a balloon, and so I could use really wet clay. And then I just wedged the clay back up, and it's ready to throw again. So that, folks, is what you need to be thinking about. Anything else?
All right, thank you so
All
much.
right.